This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I am here with another wonderful friend, Sarah Zubiate Bennett, who is the co-founder and board member for the Dallas Express. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ronnie.
I've been waiting to talk to you for the longest time. Yeah, your story in business and life is just absolutely amazing. And so tell us about your business side first. I'd love to get into a conversation about what you've done from the business perspective. But then there's so much more to your evolution as a person and as a leader that I'd love to talk about. But tell me about your business career. You went on to college at St. Edward's University. And,
I did,
and
yeah.
then you went on to do great things from a business perspective.
I did. And so, I did go to St. Edward's University. And so I graduated with dual degrees in finance and marketing. And then I went to Fidelity Investments. So I started off in their investments division and then left as a fixed income trader.
Okay.
And that was right when stuff was in turmoil, auction rate preferred market. It was kind of a hell in a handbasket situation.
And were you based here in Dallas or New York or some other?
It was out in Westlake on their huge campus. Okay. So they actually had a huge desk there.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't know that, but it's a pretty expansive campus. It's beautiful.
And we're having our own Texas stock market here, stock exchange here.
I know.
Yeah, which is, so it's
very interesting.
Texas is quite fascinating from a business perspective.
It is.
So you worked there and you were in wealth management and built a career?
Yes. So then from there, I went to the institutional finance/consulting space for several years. I left there right when the twins were born. So I basically said, I'm going to be leaving after I have kids. I wasn't one that kind of took a maternity leave and then, right. I just said, I'm not going to come back. So then I started my food company. Okay. Right at that period of time, I had to go back to do some capital formation work to get the Rise School of Dallas built and other systems within that whole umbrella.
So you went from wealth management to building a food company.
Yes, and fundraising and all the things. I know. My brother is always like, you have a really, really wide net.
You do. But, it makes life really fascinating.
It does.
So let's do this. And I'd love to talk about the Dallas Express. I want to come back to your food company. But you grew up where?
El Paso. The border of El Paso and Juarez.
Okay. So that's home for all your families there and...
Ish, yeah.
Ish,
okay. So I was given up for adoption. So I was adopted at birth, and I was raised in El Paso and Juarez. And then I met my biological family when I was 19, almost 20.
But you didn't know you were adopted until much later.
I was 17.
Wow.
And something that I'm pretty open about is that I had a somewhat tumultuous relationship with my dad. Okay. And what I'm going to today, the reason I'm in this whole dress, I'm going to the family place luncheon, domestic violence related. So I'm kind of an advocate for just that particular space. And in one of these disagreements with my father, I went to his sister's house, my aunt, and she was the one that told me, you have every right to be confused about this, and you are right. You are not. So
this was when you were a teenager,
I was 17.
You were having some disagreements with your father.
Yes.
And then you went to talk to your aunt, who told you this entirely earth-shattering story about being adopted.
Yes, and it actually helped me.
Really? How's that?
Yes, because for me, I couldn't understand how I was related to my father and my mother because they allowed this particular situation to exist at home that was awful. And then when she told me, you are different. Okay. You are different. And what you feel in your heart is right.
Interesting.
So it was crazy.
So you were only child raised in that specific family.
Yes.
But then you learned that you have other siblings.
Yes.
And your parents are both from Mexico as well?
Yes. Yes. So at least, I think, because... My birth mother, who I'm now very close to, she's from Jimenez, Chihuahua. Oh, wow. And so, I mean, a very, very impoverished, poor part of Chihuahua. And I mean, even more so than Juarez. And my biological father, I still do not know who that is.
Okay.
So, I'm glad for 23andMe and Ancestry because I'm able to piece a lot more together than I otherwise would know. What's
interesting, I've come across a lot of people that are adopted, and it's such a gift in so many ways, though. There's a state senator here in our area that is adopted and ended up going to Baylor University and has done really well. So it's commendable to kind of look back at that journey, and it probably set you up to do well in business, just having to work through challenges and concepts, and it seems like it may have been a benefit in some ways based on how you approached it.
And I couldn't be more grateful for my upbringing and situation. I mean, my family and my parents that raised me were terrific in many ways, right? But of course, there's that aspect of people's lives that they don't talk about until they're older.
Right. Very true.
I would never change anything, strangely enough, because it's all made me who I am today.
Well, and a lot of people look back and they want to do it absolutely that. They think that something could have been better or different. And sometimes that just makes us the person we are, and it gives us that strength to go on and do wonderful things. So how did you end up going to college and getting into the wealth management side? So you grew up in that area of El Paso. You went on to do some great things and pursue this college.
Yeah, I did. And I guess I should say I did well academically. So they gave me a full ride, which was very nice. And I just didn't want to embark upon any journey that would give me more student debt. So I always had to be mindful of the fact that my mom that I was raised with was diagnosed with Parkinson's and dementia.
Oh, wow.
And my first question to her was, okay, do you have long-term care insurance? This is when I'm 15.
Oh, gosh.
And I would just read about all things finance for whatever reason. And when she said no, I said, okay, so a lot of this is going to fall to me, whether you realize that or not. And of course it has. So I always planned and I made decisions in life based upon what would give me the most freed up cash, basically. So
you learned that really early. I was just speaking to the former CEO of 7-Eleven who wrote a book about education and how education is just so critical, whether at whatever level, whether it's high school or college or even afterwards. And it sounds like you started really early trying to figure out how to learn as much as you can.
I did.
And then you built a career on it.
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah. Was there any defining moment back in that period of time that caused you to think, I am going to college, I'm going to build a career in wealth management? Was there something that put you on that track? Was there a family friend or a business or an internship that kind of sparked?
It was the fact that my parents, especially my mother, suffered from paralysis of overanalysis. And she, truly, but I mean, in her need to, or desire to make sure that she saved as much as she could, she opted out of long-term care insurance,
Okay.
Which was fairly devastating because I was admitted into pretty prestigious universities, but I didn't go to any of them because I couldn't foot the bill.
Okay.
Well, I could foot the bill with debt.
Right.
But for me, it was always that opportunity cost of, okay, here's my situation. I have very humble beginnings. I'm going to have to take care of my mother when she's older. How can I ensure that other families do not fall into that particular trap? And they're having conversations early on with their families to ensure an estate plan that's bulletproof.
So you had access to top universities and you turned them down so that you can kind of protect your future financial circumstances. And that's incredible because so many people struggle with college debt now.
And that's the thing. Yeah. That's the thing. And of course, I never intended for any person to bail me out of my debt or any of that. So that's why I had to kind of choose responsibly and go with the scholarship that provided the most the most bang for its buck.
That's incredible because so many places, especially businesses, they look to those Ivy Leagues or those top schools. And you just said, without saying it, that you didn't need to go that direction to get into a great position. I think you were in the top 1% at the company from the wealth management perspective.
I was.
So you got a great education, but it was really that drive.
It was something. I mean, it was something. I mean, grit, whatever you call it, a healthy blend of that insane drive, work ethic, but also that coupled ability to have some intelligence behind it as well. Because especially, I left the fixed income position, and my friends who were still there, they were like, it's 2 weeks after and you're still number one on this board. This is nuts that you had that much of a lead. And I was like, that's crazy because, you know, I don't know, but thank goodness it was, and it's still part of me, that drive.
That's hilarious. So what's intriguing is that you probably didn't even set out per se to be number one or top 1%. You just wanted to excel, presumably.
Yeah. I just had the drive.
And then you decided to go start a food business.
A food business.
Okay.
Yes. And interestingly enough, I mean, I didn't know that I was going to move into that field, but it was one that, I mean, it was challenging. And in hindsight, I just wish someone would have told me, gain experience in that particular industry. But I don't even know that experience would have been able to, to help.
How'd you select that? Did that come from a history of just enjoying food or growing products, or what took you to that food industry?
I think it was a blend of things, right? It was a passion for food, culture. And for me, my parents ate very unhealthily.
Okay.
And so they were all Latin-based, plant-based products that were top 8 allergen-free. It was the first queso de jalapeno, queso ever, to use many sweet peppers at its base. So it was, and I developed the recipes for all of these. So it was that scientific acumen that was challenging, developing the quality control process, keeping all the prices down, the logistical planning, that challenge of being able to say, okay, I can grow this to a national company. And I did. But, I had aspirations to sell it for huge amounts of money. But after COVID, literally, I went from being insanely profitable on every jar, quite profitable, to then being flipped on every single jar because I had garlic, as an example, in all of my products. And China is our number one supplier of over 90% of our garlic, even organic. So understanding how to forecast and plan appropriately, it was one thing. But then it was being met with the food giant that I strongly oppose even to this day. It's tough for products to be successful on the shelf if they do not add MSG or some type of additive to extend its shelf life. Yeah, and I was absolutely opposed to it. I wouldn't do it. And for me, I thought, okay, so it came time to where I had to decide, now I'm not insanely profitable on these jars. I'm losing money, and I'm also faced with this decision. Right. So it was a value proposition that I could either get out of or get on board with.
Well, it's interesting. And I love to talk more about this because I think a lot of our listeners and business leaders they struggle with figuring out when to move on and when to hold on to a business far too long. And it's like some of those athletes that play the top of their game, and then they go too long in their career and they kind of sacrifice the level of quality and excellence that they were used to. But talk us through the business, because a lot of people aren't familiar with shelf space, paying for shelf space in the grocery stores. It's a tough business. And then if you don't structure the deal right, a lot of times they have the ability to send you all that product back at your loss.
And thank God that never happened to me. But yes, they do.
They do, depending on the brand and how they stock their shelves. But walk me through that learning experience, creating your own recipes. You were in some of the top retailers, right? Yeah, tell us about that business. That's fascinating to me. It's a tough business to be.
It's a tough business. And I was warned, hey, it's a tough business. It's really hard to be successful. And again, I was relatively successful up until the flip side of COVID. There was really no recovering from that unless, there was a way out. I just didn't want to do it. So it's tough. You have to first decide whenever you're creating a product, all right, where am I going to sell this? Is this going to be center store, right? Because that negotiation process is entirely different from outer store. Normally, outer store is where the healthier items live. But in order to have a particular price point with a particular margin, I opted for center store once I developed the process to make my products shelf stable. But with just basically heat. So that entire process.
I have to tell you a little insight on guacamole. Love it.
Yes.
I moved out to California. It became my deal. And guacamole turns brown really, really quick. So my producer might say, Ronnie, where are you going with this? And why is this on there? But I found the same thing. I hate adding extra. I heard that if you put lemon or lime in there, it can make it stable.
Or citric acid if
something
people
like
wanted
that.
to do it.
But I didn't. So what I found is that I add either a little water or oil. I cook it at a high temperature, just really quick. And it stays green for much longer. It doesn't turn brown immediately. It works out really well. So you used heat similarly on your products.
Yes.
Just to create that shelf stability without additives.
Exactly. But even with that entire process, that quality control and scientific process, it still wasn't as long as my counterparts, right? My competition, who had just slight amounts of citric acid or slight amounts of whatever. And it was tough because I had to make sure that it was being turned at a certain amount of time.
Right.
But I did well in both places. Costco, for example, I was sold in the refrigerated section.
Oh, interesting.
And so you have to find the right tubs that can take high heat for a certain period of time. And it's still not going to be as good for as long as when we manufactured it in glass.
So, Sarah, you just glossed over this. You're in Costco.
Yeah. But Whole Foods, Sprouts, I mean, it was all different. Walk me to the beginning,
though. So, were you selling out the back of your car at first? Like, how did you go from... I
was selling at the farmer's market. Yeah. I was selling at the farmer's market in Dallas.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make sure that I had something sustainable there. So it really was proof of concept.
Right.
Ish, because it's inherently different from selling into a store. My first store that I landed was H-E-B.
Really?
So, yeah.
So you know H-E-B is the sixth largest, around the sixth largest privately owned company in the country.
Yeah.
Over $40 billion in annual revenue.
I'm aware.
They only operate in Texas.
Yep.
Huge brand.
Yep.
Okay, and that was your first store.
It was my first store, yeah.
It wasn't even a local single store location.
No, that's whenever I left my capital formation and fundraising space, because I was like, okay, I need to do this full time. This is no longer a part-time gig. And at that point, that's whenever I actually was voted onto the board of one of Monty's publicly traded companies.
Okay.
So it was right when I sold it into retail. It was just a busy time. And at that point, my process was entirely different because I was using a co-packer.
Okay.
Towards the end of it, I opened my own manufacturing facility, developed my own processes, my own team, everything.
So you moved away from a co-packer.
I did.
Because a lot of places will tell you that's the best avenue to keep your costs down. So you decided to go
I did. I moved away because I started making it in Athens, Texas.
Okay.
That's whenever Monty and I were together.
Right.
And so I said, if I can pay for rental space in this particular area, I can grow a percentage of my hard to source and more expensive ingredients.
Sure.
He's like, so you're going to farm?
Wow.
I was like, yeah, I want to farm. I want to be able to say that it's basically this entire off the grid space.
Wow.
In which I can create and manufacture all of these recipes.
You vertically integrated at a really early stage, it sounds like, just to control your costs. And I presume that events kind of like the COVID will force people to really rethink things. And it sounds like you did this before COVID, but you figure that out early, that to control your costs, and so many items are coming from overseas. That it makes it hard to really manage that well.
That's
because sometimes a lot of these products you have to order so far in advance just to make sure they arrive by the time you need it.
That's right.
And people don't really recognize it. Like the holiday orders in the winter, fall, they're ordering those in January, February, March.
That's right.
For that following season, which means it has to be produced beforehand. So you're having to take kind of that same approach and decided to bring it back and grow it directly so you can control your quality and your schedule.
And my whole thing, I was really frustrated because I always wanted to use a different kind of oil than I was using. I was using organic safflower oil, but I hate seed oils kind of in general. So that was even a little bit of a sacrifice for me. But I thought, okay, I can get on board with the high oleic, right? That kind of the expeller pressed safflower oil, which I had to buy in huge bulk way before.
Interesting.
But it was a very interesting space, and I'm so glad I did it. I was just very, I I never in my life would have thought that, well, I guess many of us never knew that COVID would happen.
Right.
But to understand the supply process for so many of our vegetables and how that shutdown crippled us, and the food industry is still crippled from it.
It is.
Today.
Yep. And so what you did is amazing. Tell us about your products. Like, what did you sell? What did you make? What was it that you built?
My main 3 SKUs one was my original salsa that my mother used to make at home. The second was a crema de jalapeno that had no dairy, no top 8 allergens, no soy, no gluten, no any of the things. And then, so that one was spicier. So good. I still make it today. And then the queso. So the queso. Yep. And the queso de jalapeno, that was used mini sweet peppers at its base. And it was kind of like a bright color, almost like Velveeta, but plant-based, top 8 allergen-free, organic, all the things. And so those were my main 3 SKUs that I grew. And
it's amazing. What made you go allergy-free? Was there something that happened? And I think I mentioned to you off air that my youngest daughter had a lot of food allergies. And finding products that she could have was a bit of a struggle. We spent a lot of time calling the companies and walking through their manufacturing process to make sure there was no cross-contamination. What made you decide to make it allergy-friendly?
My own stomach.
Okay.
I have struggled for decades finding food that doesn't send me straight to the restroom. And so it was my own stomach. And I thought, my God, all these staples that I grew up with, like a good crema or a good whatever it is, a good queso, and I can't eat them generally unless it's very rare. But those I made it so that I could eat. And I knew if I was struggling with it, especially being a Latina growing up with all that delicious food, yeah, I wanted it.
So how did you get it into Costco or the other stores? Even H-E-B, your first one, how did you end up at H-E-B?
You know, it was always finding the right person to get in, right? Costco, who's that guy, he's actually a really good friend, he and his wife. And so that I didn't know them before, but they believed in the product, believed in the story. They loved it. And so it was just that, making sure that I was able to find the right point person at either place who could help.
Is there a story behind that for our listener? Because it's hard to go from zero to finding someone that can listen to. Was it on LinkedIn, or did you go to a food conference? I know they have a lot of those, or distributor conference, or some kind of event that led to it. You fly to Washington to visit with Costco. Like, how did that?
It's a really interesting question. What I was good at from an early age that I wasn't really aware of was building a network, a really good network of people who could vouch for me. And I mean, so my first for H-E-B, I was friends with a gal from college who worked just bagging during college at H-E-B. She actually went to work in the corporate office and in the HR division. And she's like, oh my gosh, you're actually doing this. And so she said, I actually know the right person. Let me see, send me some and let me see what they think. So it was LinkedIn, that always allowed me to know, oh my gosh, Rebecca's here? What? She's doing that? And so, yes, I guess just being humble enough from an early stage to know, just be kind to people because you never know where people are going to end up, because I never had an elaborate or extensive background, especially of well-connected, wealthy persons as a child at all. It was the antithesis of that, very humble. And so, but I think just by always being a good communicator, loving people, and relying on my strengths, that's all I can tell people to do.
And another one that I think you understated. Having that relationship and connecting those dots, I think, is so critical. So you have a friend from college that you followed her through the years, and you think, I've got this food business now. Let me just reach out. You never know what happens. I was on a flight recently and I saw a movie. And the movie, it was a biography. It was really fascinating. And as I'm watching the movie, I was thinking, I'd love to connect with this person, because the story of this person, they're going to come on the show, by the way, so I can't say who it is. But the story is absolutely incredible. And as I was processing it, I thought, I've got a friend in that same industry. I wonder if he knows her. So I texted him later that day once I landed. He said, absolutely, I know her. He texted her, and by the next day we were having a conversation.
Exactly.
But it sounds like kind of you've figured out how to build those relationships, and then you've connected the dots on understanding how can you partner together.
That's right. And over time throughout my life, I mean, that's been, I think, the one thing that really helped, because I think one of the only ways I was able to be number one in my division in finance and kind of from there, aside from the work ethic, when people like someone, they'll take their call.
Exactly.
Right? They're like, oh, it's this person, versus
I found that if they like you and they believe that you're honest with the level of integrity, like they trust what you say.
Exactly.
It helps out.
That's right.
So you sold the business?
Yes. Yes. And so well, the recipes was, kind of what I was aiming to sell, because I didn't want to get rid of the name Zubies.
Right.
And so, but even towards the end of that entire process of selling the recipes, it was so hard.
Really?
It was so hard because we had several people involved at the end.
Sure.
Then the one company who was going to buy them for a pretty handsome amount.
Right.
They went under.
Oh, wow.
So that process was
So it's interesting.
tough.
You went from very excited, I have a buyer, this will live on, my invention, it's in good hands, and then they vanished. Right?
So while everything was great, if there's no legacy there, so then I had to I cried a lot, because I thought, wow, this all happened and nothing's going to live on.
Right.
And so I had to regroup real quickly and say, okay, on to the next thing.
Right.
Right? I mean, I processed all my emotions, grieved, and then thought, all right, time to get going on what's next.
So I hope you don't mind me asking you this, because I think that's an interesting point. And I do the same thing. In private, sometimes you just need a moment. Right? You need a moment to kind of look back and say, well, that didn't turn out quite like I'd hoped. What next? And you just take a moment to decompress, whether it's crying or riding a bike or running a race. But just an opportunity to reflect and just take time away for a moment to kind of process it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, I mean, Monty, my husband, he's a successful businessman. And even whenever he would say things kind of at that end point, he's like, Sarah, you did everything right.
Correct.
You did everything right. Yeah. There's no way that a person in your situation, unless they went the whole venture capital route or private equity route, which he really advised me against. And he said, I'm really never going to see you.
Okay.
And something that I actually went to some form of treatment for was workaholism.
Right.
It was bad.
Okay.
And he said, so you can go that route with your company. They can infuse it with all the necessary capital and connections to change the recipes, but what you're holding on to, not wanting to compromise the recipes and adding in those additives, you're going to have to do it with these people. And that was hard because even someone like him telling me you did everything right, that this is not your fault, it's real hard, real hard, especially when you're used to succeeding in areas of business. It was tough.
You know, those setback moments are highly educational, but they are very difficult. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of business people struggle with that element. When they have a setback, they think that everything is just over, and they don't know how to recover. So it sounds like you figured it out. Yeah. So tell me then, I know we're at the end of our program, and I definitely want, when I have you back on the show next, I would love to explore the workaholic piece that you mentioned, the family piece, because I think as business people, for someone that's highly successful like you, finding that right balance to do something else, whether it's giving back in the community, raising a family, figuring out this working too much element, I'd love to explore that with you in our next program. But tell me about the Dallas Express. So you had Zubies as a business. You're the co-founder of the Dallas Express, which is a media company not related to food, related to wealth management. How did you end up in the in the media business?
It was actually seeing Monty destroyed in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all these things over COVID, because they, had their narrative, despite the true circumstances, which was very frustrating. So in that, I kept saying, Monty, I really think that this would be an interesting opportunity. Everyone's sick of it. Everyone's sick of this slanted, honest, very biased media. Even if we start small. And of course, I had to get his buy-in because without him, it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Because all my fun cash was tied up in Zubies at that time. So the way it happened, it overlapped perfectly. He and I decided to start this. And he launched it with me on my birthday a few years ago on February 8th. And so it was just out of a need. And it was also an area that I was highly passionate about. And it was a business focused on connection, relationships, which is what I told you I really feel like I've done okay with in my life, especially not having any from childhood. I just thought it was meant to be something important and something that I could really throw my energy into.
That's amazing. So you have that, and you have a podcast as well.
Yeah, it's under the umbrella of Dallas Express.
Tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, so it's a civic-based podcast with some really fun elements to it as well. So there's a main interview where I interview business and community leaders that are specifically interested in discussing particular pillars with me, whether that's crime, homelessness, the streets, the city, anything economically related to what is Dallas, so the DFW area. Then aside from that interview, it's highlighting a lot of the beautiful aspects of the DFW area because it is a vibrant space. It is a vibrant community. And so it's really developing that balanced approach to telling the good of the city and also talking about what we can do to be better.
Wow. Yeah, Sarah, so it's really fascinating for me having you on the program because I've learned so much just in this conversation. We've been together at several different events, but you built a news business, a podcast. You were one of the top performers in wealth management. You built a food business and you sold the recipe for it. You've been really, really successful. And this is for someone that, as you mentioned, came from very humble beginnings. So your story is a reflection of doing something great and figuring it out. And I think there are a lot of young people coming up. I have a new series on Gen Z. What would you tell that Gen Z group that's now getting into their careers and into leadership and management about the young Sarah and how they can build businesses and become successful like you?
You know, interestingly, I'd probably tell them the exact same thing that I was told my whole life. Be nimble. Be flexible and adapt. They're going to have to adapt much quicker than we are. Or I guess we're still going to have to adapt. But for our children who are younger, let's say 15, 10, that age, I think it's some staggering statistic, like 75% of the jobs that will exist when they're older don't even exist today. So as far as the ability to adapt in unprecedented circumstances, they're going to have to face that much more so than us. So constantly learn, that all of that old advice applies forever. Because if we do, in fact, have to see the first superhuman, if you look at Neuralink, how not even a surgeon is skilled enough to implant all of those nodes into the brain for all of the paraplegics who can now run sufficient software, play chess. Surgeons are going to be outdated. Surgeons are going to be replaced. So it is constantly, I think, proceeding with humility to understand you will more than likely have to reinvent yourself a few times. I mean, those of us, me, I'm a prime example. I'm still in the process of building my next space in the media world, but it's something that I'm doing as best as I can now while being busy. But that will more than likely be my legacy. Hell, maybe that'll go under too. I don't know. But as far as my resilience, being able to adapt, I think that is absolutely what I would say to that generation.
I love it. Well, we're going to have you back because this just wasn't enough time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
You've been absolutely wonderful, Sarah. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me, Ronnie.
Thanks for joining Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.